For over 4 decades, one of Hollywood's darkest secrets has been buried at sea. The official story of Natalie Wood's death was a tragic accident, a heartbreaking end to a brilliant life. But what if the official story was a lie? What if powerful figures helped hide what really happened on that boat? New evidence and courageous witnesses are now exposing a story that's far more sinister than we ever imagined. While the case isn't officially closed, the story we were told has crumbled, revealing a truth that is worse, so much worse than we thought. On the morning of November 29, 1981, the world awoke to shocking news. Natalie Wood, the luminous, dark-eyed star of Rebel Without a Cause and West Side Story, was dead at 43. Her body was found floating in the cold Pacific Ocean, a mile from her family's yacht, the Splendor, moored off California's Catalina Island. On board the yacht that weekend were 3 other people: her husband, the famous actor Robert Wagner, her friend and co-star Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern. Within days, the Los Angeles County coroner delivered a verdict that seemed to close the case: accidental drowning. The theory was that Wood, maybe bothered by a dinghy bumping against the yacht, went to retie it. She might have slipped, hit her head, and fallen into the water. It was a neat, tidy, and tragic explanation. But for those who knew Natalie, it was anything but tidy. The story was riddled with holes. How could a woman with a lifelong, crippling fear of dark water decide to manage a boat in the middle of the night, wearing only a nightgown and socks? It never sat right. For decades, the case festered, a wound in the heart of Hollywood that wouldn't heal. But now, after years of whispers and dogged investigation, the pieces are finally falling into place. The scientific evidence now points in the same direction as eyewitness testimony that was ignored for years. While law enforcement hasn't officially declared the case solved, they have made it clear this was no simple accident. To understand the tragedy of Natalie Wood's death, you have to understand the brilliance of her life and the one great fear that haunted it. Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko to Russian immigrants, she was pushed into the studio system at just 4 years old. Her mother, Maria, was the classic stage mom, a woman of immense ambition who saw her daughter as a ticket to fame. Maria was also deeply superstitious and told Natalie a gypsy had warned her she would die by drowning in dark water. For a young child, this was a curse that became a legendary fear among friends and family. Her sister, Lana Wood, has always been adamant. Natalie could not swim and would never have willingly gone near the water's edge at night. Despite this private terror, her public life was a string of incredible successes. She was the adorable little girl in Miracle on 34th Street, the angsty teen opposite James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, and the iconic Maria in West Side Story. She was Hollywood royalty. She married Hollywood's handsome leading man Robert Wagner not once, but twice. Theirs was a fiery, passionate, and famously tumultuous romance. They first married in 1957, divorced in 1962, and then found their way back to each other in 1972. But behind the glamorous facade, friends described a relationship marked by intense jealousy and volatility. In 1981, Natalie was poised for a major comeback, filming the thriller Brainstorm. With the charismatic Christopher Walken, it was meant to be her grand reintroduction to the world. Instead, it would be her last performance. That fall, everything was converging: her rekindled career, the simmering tensions in her marriage, and her lifelong, paralyzing fear of deep, dark water. The Thanksgiving weekend of 1981 was meant to be a getaway. Natalie, Robert Wagner, and Christopher Walken set sail for Catalina Island on the Wagner's yacht, the Splendor. The sea was calm, but on board the boat, a storm was brewing. The tension was palpable, much of it reportedly revolving around Wagner's jealousy of the friendship between his wife and Walken. According to the boat's captain, Dennis Davern, The trouble started before the final night. He described Wagner as tense and irritated. On Saturday, November 28th, the group went ashore for dinner at Doug's Harbor Reef restaurant. The drinks flowed freely. According to Davern, when he and Wagner saw Natalie and Christopher Walken laughing together at the bar, Wagner began to really heat up. They returned to the splendor after 10 p.m., bringing the tension and alcohol with them. Back in the main salon, the situation allegedly exploded. For years, the official story was that Wagner and Walken had a political argument. But Davern, the only other person on the boat who wasn't a star, tells a much more violent story, a story he claims he was pressured to hide for years. According to Dennis Davern's account, the argument wasn't about politics. It was about Natalie. He claims a drunken, furious Wagner accused Walken of trying to have an affair with his wife. The confrontation peaked when Wagner allegedly smashed a wine bottle on the table, screaming at Walken, "What are you trying to do, my wife?" At this point, Walken went to his cabin. Natalie, according to Davern, fled to her and Wagner's stateroom, but the fight wasn't over. Davern claims he heard Wagner follow her, and the argument became a physical fight with loud yelling and things being thrown. Then, he says, the fight moved from the stateroom to the rear deck of the yacht. He heard the angry voices of both Natalie and Wagner at the stern. And then, after a final, violent crescendo, there was only silence. Sometime later, Davern went to check and found Robert Wagner alone, who told him, "Natalie's missing." The dinghy was also gone. This is where the story takes a damning turn. Davern says he suggested they turn on the yacht's powerful searchlight to scan the water, but Wagner told him not to. He suggested they radio for help. Again, Wagner allegedly refused, saying they should wait and see if she comes back. For hours, no call for help was made. The Coast Guard wasn't alerted until 1:30 a.m. That delay, that inexplicable inaction, has been a festering question for over 40 years. Why would a husband, whose wife was terrified of the very water she had just vanished, wait so long to get help? When the sun rose on Sunday, November 29th, a helicopter spotted Natalie Wood's body, dressed in her nightgown, wool socks, and a red down jacket. The initial investigation was shockingly brief. The case was effectively closed in a couple of weeks, with the coroner ruling it an accident. The theory was that Natalie, annoyed by the dinghy, tried to secure it, slipped, and fell in. It was a plausible story if you didn't know Natalie Wood. Her sister Lana immediately disputed it, stating Natalie would never go near the water at night dressed like that. The investigation was also plagued by a stunning lack of curiosity. The key witnesses, Wagner, Walken, and Davern, were interviewed, but their initial stories seemed to align. Davern would later claim he was coached on what to say to protect Wagner. Then there was the physical evidence. The autopsy noted dozens of bruises on Natalie's arms and legs and an abrasion on her cheek. In 1981, these were explained away as injuries sustained during the drowning. It was a convenient explanation that fit the accidental fall theory, but as forensics advanced, that explanation began to look less like science and more like a dismissal. For 30 years, the case lay dormant. But in 2011, propelled by Dennis Davern's public claims of a cover-up, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the investigation. One of the first steps was re-examining the original autopsy. What they found was explosive. In 2012, the LA County Chief Coroner officially changed Natalie Wood's cause of death. It was no longer an accidental drowning. The new cause was drowning and other undetermined factors. This was a seismic shift. The new report focused on the bruises. It stated that, contrary to the 1981 finding, some injuries may have occurred before she entered the water. The report noted the number and location of the bruises supported them having occurred prior to entry in the water. In other words, the evidence was consistent with her being assaulted. Detective Ralph Hernandez, a lead investigator on the reopened case, put it bluntly in a 2018 interview. Natalie Wood looked like a victim of an assault. This new forensics opinion shattered the slip and fall theory. The science was finally catching up to the story Dennis Davern had been telling for years. With the case reopened, people who had been silent for decades started coming forward. Investigators revealed they had interviewed new witnesses who described a new sequence of events. One witness on a nearby boat told investigators they heard a man and woman arguing loudly on the Splendor's deck, believing the voices were Wagner's and Wood's. This directly corroborated Davern's account. Another witness, Marilyn Wayne, who was also on a nearby boat, had claimed for years that she heard a woman's desperate cries for help from the water, yelling, "Help me! Someone please help me!" For years, her story was dismissed. But in the reopened investigation, it took on chilling new significance. More recently, reports surfaced in late 2024 about two more witnesses who had spoken to author Marty Rulli, who co-wrote Davern's book. One man, a 17-year-old deckhand at the time, said he heard the argument, and later, Natalie's screams for help from the water. He hadn't come forward at the time because the death was so quickly ruled an accident. He figured he must have been mistaken. These witness accounts, deemed very credible by investigators, created a powerful chorus pointing to a violent argument and a woman's desperate cries from the dark. In February 2018, the investigation took its most significant step. The L.A. County Sheriff's Department officially named Robert Wagner a person of interest in his wife's death. This doesn't mean he's a suspect, but it means investigators believe he is crucial to solving the case. Lieutenant John Corina was clear why. "As we've investigated the case over the last 6 years, I think he's more of a person of interest now," Corina stated. "I mean, we know now that he was the last person to be with Natalie before she disappeared." Investigators pointed out that Wagner's story had reportedly shifted over the years. Most critically, since the case was reopened in 2011, Robert Wagner has refused all requests to speak with investigators. His refusal to cooperate in an investigation into his own wife's death has raised profound questions. The loving, grieving husband of 1981 had been replaced by a person of interest in what authorities now call a suspicious death. The story of Natalie Wood's death isn't just about what happened on the yacht. It's also about what happened afterward. It's a story about power, influence, and the suggestion of a deliberate effort to control the narrative. Why was the original investigation so quick to accept the accident theory despite so many red flags? Some investigators and authors suggest that immense pressure to protect Robert Wagner, a beloved movie star, played a huge role. In 1981, Hollywood was a machine that fiercely protected its own. A high-profile homicide investigation was something the industry would have wanted to avoid at all costs. Dennis Davern has long maintained that he was sequestered by Wagner's representatives and coached on the story to tell police his true account buried for years. Think about it. If an ordinary person's spouse went missing from a boat after a violent argument, and that person waited hours to call for help, they would face intense scrutiny. But this was Robert Wagner. And the speed with which the case was shut down suggests his celebrity may have afforded him a level of protection that justice should never allow. Was the initial investigation just incompetent, or was it willfully blind? The reopening of the case wasn't just about finding out how Natalie died. It was also about rectifying what many believe was a grave injustice. The evidence is overwhelming, but as of today, the case remains officially open and unsolved, with no charges filed. What do you think happened on the Splendor that night? Do you believe the testimony and forensic evidence point to a clear conclusion? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into Hollywood's darkest secrets, make sure to subscribe. So let's summarize what we actually know, based on the official record and credible testimony. We know Natalie Wood had a paralyzing fear of dark water and could not swim, making it highly unlikely she would have gone to the boat's edge alone at night. We know from the revised coroner's report that her body had fresh bruises likely sustained before she entered the water, indicating she looked like the victim of an assault. We have multiple credible witnesses who heard a violent argument between a man and a woman on the yacht, followed by a woman's screams for help from the water. We have consistent testimony from the boat's captain, Dennis Davern, who says he witnessed a violent, jealous rage from Robert Wagner just before Natalie disappeared. And finally, we know that Robert Wagner, the last person to see his wife alive, is officially a person of interest who has refused to speak with investigators for over a decade. The story of a simple slip and fall is no longer the official story. It has been replaced by a narrative supported by forensics and eyewitnesses, a story of a terrifying argument, a possible assault, and a woman who desperately cried for help as she was left in the cold, dark water. While the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has not formally charged anyone, the mystery is no longer about if the official story was wrong, but about how the truth was kept secret for so long.